Alright guys, we're going to go on a little exploratory adventure today down the Broad River to some waterfalls. The Broad River, as you guys know, as we've talked about before, is part of the Upper Broad River watershed. Now the watershed covers about a 94 square mile area that encompasses both, or actually Rutherford, Henderson, and Buncombe counties. And we're actually in the Buncombe County portion of the watershed. Now where we're at right now, the river flows very flat and very smooth, but as it enters into Hickory Nut Gorge, it picks up velocity and is moving very fast. So as a result, you have a lot of erosion and sedimentation that occurs as a result of that. And so when we talk about the larger Hickory Nut Gorge area, which is down around Bat Cave, Chimney Rock Village, and down that area, the river is moving so fast at that point that it's removing a lot of rock as it flows through. Where we're going right now, you're going to see some of the bedrock that the river flows over. You can see some waterfalls, and hopefully we'll see some really interesting vegetation as we're moving along. So some good wildflowers and things like that. All right, so come on with us and join us. And the Broad River is flowing through this nice little floodplain here. We're in Buncombe County, about probably 9 miles from the headwaters of the Broad River. But look how nice and flat it is. It's hard to imagine that just a short distance downstream, this river picks up in velocity and heads down into Hickory Nut Gorge, where it loses several hundred feet in elevation. Pretty amazing how the landscape changes the further down into the gorge you get. Alright, so this is a plant called shining club moss. Club mosses are quite interesting in the fact that these are relatives to ferns. They're not actually mosses at all, but are ferns, or not really ferns either. They're fern allies. Often we call these lower vascular plants, but they reproduce using spores. They will produce these little small cone or spore-bearing structures, and once those spores mature, they drop out, and this will spread that way. And if we look up the hill here, you can see there's several clumps all around, and basically those spores are basically just moving down the hill with water. But shining club moss is actually fairly prolific throughout Hickory Nut Gorge. It usually grows in areas where it gets plenty of sun. There's actually some of this growing just behind the school. They're on the Ditmer-Watts Trail, so it's not like you have to go too terribly far to find it. All right guys, check this out. This is something you don't see very often. This is where a beaver has really been going to town. There's about 3 inches of wood left in the center of this tree that's holding it up. These guys have been absolutely working. They're working now on this this river birch. They're wearing it out. The first one, that's a tulip poplar, but my goodness, I had never seen such. And look at all the chips on the ground. These guys have been working hard. It's probably either a single beaver or a pair, who knows. Look at the depth of those shoe marks. That is incredible. These guys, beavers, eat wood. they actually will also gnaw on it to help make their keep their teeth from growing. Beavers are rodents, and their teeth are always growing, and so as a result, they have to keep them basically ground down, and so by eating on wood, that keeps their teeth from continuing to grow such that it would cause problems with their mouths and all this kind of thing. Mice and squirrels and other gnawers do the same thing. Here's some small pieces that they've gnawed on. But man, this is pretty interesting. Not something you just see just every day. Alright, so I don't know how well you can see this, but these little things that you see sticking up out of the ground here, this is called beech drops. Beech drops are a parasite that lives on the roots of beech trees, and there's several beech trees around in here, and basically what it does, it attaches itself to the roots of the beech trees, and from there it will grow, and it uses the water system of the beech to get all of its food and water. It has no chlorophyll. Actually, these are pretty well gone for this. This is last year's stems, but it'll flower and go to seed just the same way any other plant would. It just doesn't have the ability to photosynthesize because it lacks chlorophyll. So that's why it lives as a parasite on the plants, primarily beech trees, and that's why they call it beech drops. All right, guys, found a little millipede here. This little pink and black one here. It's got these guys feed on black cherry, or that's one of the things that they feed on. But when you pick these up and disturb them, they will emit a smell, and that smell smells like black cherry. Okay, so they're not harmful. I know it's a millipede because if you look at its body segments, it has two pairs of legs per segment. That's the way you can tell a millipede from a centipede, which would only have one pair of legs per segment. But these are neat little critters. They're harmless. They basically are just feeding on things that are on the ground, and are generally just like to be left alone. But my hands will now smell like cherries for a good little while, at least until I get a chance to wash them. So I'm gonna put him back down here and let him do his thing. And this is waterfall number 1 on the Broad River, setting up for what I believe will be a nice series as we move downstream to see the other ones. We know this is one of 4 waterfalls on the Broad River, at least 4 major waterfalls on the Broad River. There's some smaller ones downstream, but they don't look nearly as good as the ones we see in this area. We follow the river down. You see this big rock there, that's called Toad Rock. Very interesting piece of rock. Actually, this whole section of river right here, if you look, it's mostly bedrock in here, which is part of the reason why this waterfall is here. Water as it moves and cuts through the rock, it has to find a place where it can go, and so the water, the rock grain here is very tough. So it doesn't erode very easily, and the water's moving kind of perpendicular to the joints that are in the rock, so it weathers and erodes very slowly, as opposed to, like, say, the bottomless pools where water's moving parallel to a joint, and where that occurs, you get erosion that occurs very quickly. So say that the water's more or less cutting against the grain instead of with the grain, and therefore it erodes much more slowly. But everything under the water here is pretty much rock. And you can look down through here. This whole section of waterfalls here just runs over one giant slab of rock that moves through. And this really tells us a lot about the history of the Hickory Nut Gorge area as we look at these waterfalls and see how they move and how the water's moving and what it's doing to the rock. If you actually look at the rock over there, you can see how it's kind of layered in some ways, and you can see the fractures that move horizontally across that rock structure. Were this water flowing in the direction of those fractures, this might be a much different type of formation, but instead it's flowing perpendicular to those fractures, and therefore the erosion that is occurring here is occurring much more slowly. One day these waterfalls, millions of years from now probably, will not be here because the water will have worn this surface flat. So the shelves get basically eroded off until the point where they reach more solid rock. So a million years from now, this will probably look much different than what it looks right now. Interesting stuff. The second of the four falls right here, just flying in. A total of 4 falls over this short little stretch. Pretty cool. Look down the river here, and you see how wide it flows. And this is the brink of the third fall. This is number 3 right here. Really good view, a lot of flow. The water coming off of this waterfall. What a beautiful place. I always wanted to come here and check it out. And here we are. Hard to imagine something like this is on this river. And so few people know about it. I really appreciate the property owners letting us come out here and check it out. It's so nice of them, and they've got such a treasure here. It's probably a good thing that not a lot of people do know about it, because you know how people are, they tend to like to trash things. That's never a good thing. So maybe we'll just keep this to ourselves and what other few people know about it. Sometimes that's the best thing to do. Very beautiful waterfall here. This is falls number 4 on the Broad River. Very beautiful. This is the last one in the series of 4. What an awesome thing to see. Most people don't even know this waterfall exists. Kayakers know it because they like to ride down it when the water is really high. But otherwise, they're really the only ones that are aware of it, other than a few property owners and people who've been coming here for several years. Warren Wilson students like to come down here and hang out every now and then. Pretty cool place. Okay, this this is a plant called a trillium. This is Little Sweet Betsy trillium. Some people also call it toad shade trillium, but it's called, I like to call it Little Sweet Betsy because I think that's a really great common name for it. Its scientific name is Trillium cuneatum, but it has this wonderful smell. It smells like apples. And most trilliums are pollinated by flies and other similar type insects. And a lot of these trilliums, not this species in particular, but a lot of trilliums smell like rotting meat. Hence, that's why they tend to attract flies and things like that. This trillium actually smells like apples, so it's a really nice, pleasant smell, which is always a good thing. But anyway, what you're seeing here, these things that look like leaves are actually not true leaves, but rather they are what we would call bracts, and this is part of the larger plant. Most of the plant, as far as trilliums are concerned, is found underground, where it has this long rhizome that extends horizontally under the ground, and there's no telling how old some of these are. Okay, and the ground is covered with them. There's several growing right here in this area. Another interesting thing about this particular species of trillium is its seeds are carried away by ants. Ants will take and feed on those, and so this actually has a symbiotic relationship with ants. So it's a very, very interesting species. This is what we call a spring ephemeral, meaning that it comes out for a very short time in the spring before the canopy comes onto the trees, where the leaves come out. So it's taking advantage of all the sun that's coming down to the forest floor because there's not a lot of shade right now. So it's doing all of its photosynthesis. It'll flower, fruit, go to seed, and do all that stuff, carry out its life cycle before the leaves come on the trees. And then once the leaves come on the trees, the stem that you see here, this flowering stem, will die down, and then the root will continue to grow underground as it uses the energy that was stored up from photosynthesis. So then it'll be ready to come back out again next spring. Alright, so this is a shrub called yellowroot. Some people call it shrub yellowroot because it grows as a shrub. It's a woody, very thin stemmed shrub. Has these very interesting little racemes of flowers. But they call it yellowroot because it has obviously a yellow root. And that way you can see that. All right, so let's look at yellowroot for just a second. So yellowroot has been used for probably centuries by Native Americans for a yellow dye. If you were to rub your skin over this, it would turn your skin yellow. And they probably use this to color clothing and things like that. But it's a really interesting little plant. It's in the buttercup family, and so it does have some alkaloids that are associated with it, but many of the old timers use this as a spring tonic, more or less a purgative or something like that, to help get rid of the winter blahs. Now, if you've ever tried yellowroot or taken a sample of it and tasted it, it's pretty yucky. I don't particularly care for it, but some people are able to tolerate it. Some people can't even taste it. Some people are genetically unable to taste this plant, which I find very fascinating. A good friend of mine is unable to taste the chemical that's in yellow root. So that's just, I guess some people are just made that way. But very interesting little shrub. A lot of times you'll find yellow root growing along stream banks and places like that. But it's very neat stuff. I always enjoy seeing it because it reminds me of collecting it when I was a kid with my dad. He'd take me out in the woods and we would look for yellow root. And so this was always a fun thing to find. All right, so I got my taste tester here. He's going to sample the yellow root so we can see what his reaction is. All right, go ahead, Kobe.
Yeah.
What does it taste like?
Tastes like kind of a spice thing.
A spicy taste?
Yeah.
But does it have an aftertaste?
Yeah.
Is it bitter? Yeah, really bitter? Kind of like just yuck, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's nasty stuff. I don't like it either.